Have you ever made a choice that felt like signing your own life sentence? A decision where every door seemed to lead to a different kind of prison. For 24-year-old Jaya, that choice was standing at the altar, her hand trembling in the grip of a man she had met only once. A man twice her age. A man the business world called the Iron Fortress. And I was that girl, trading my youth for the survival of my father's legacy, convinced I was walking into a life of cold, lonely duty. But the universe has a strange sense of humor. Sometimes, the very prison you fear is the place where you finally learn how to be free. My father built Hanel Electronics from a single, tiny shop. It was his soul, his pride. But after a sudden illness took him from us, the foundation he built began to crack. The debts mounted, the board grew restless, and the vultures started to circle. My stepmother, Yujin, who had stepped in as CEO, was a portrait of elegant despair. Every evening, she'd return to our now-too-quiet home, her perfect composure fraying at the edges. "Your father's dream," she would sigh, her voice laced with a dramatic tremor, "is turning to dust. They'll take everything, Jaya, the company, the house. Our very name will be a joke." I was young, but I wasn't helpless. I had a business degree, I had fire in my belly. "Let me help," I'd plead. "I can work with you, we can find a way." But Yujin would just offer a sad, condescending smile. "My dear, your heart is too soft for this world. Business is a brutal game and we are losing. We don't need a passionate idealist, we need a miracle." That miracle, it turned out, had a name: Chairman Park Min-ho, the head of the Park global conglomerate, a man as reclusive as he was powerful. At 48, he was a legend, and the legends were intimidating. They said he was ruthlessly pragmatic, emotionally detached, and that he had built his empire on the ruins of his competitors. He was the last resort, the nuclear option. The night the trap was sprung, I was bringing tea to Yujin's study. I paused at the door when I heard the lawyer's voice, low and serious. "There is one viable path, Madam Choi, Park Min-ho. His liquidity could erase Hanel's debt 10 times over, but he doesn't invest in failing companies, he acquires assets." "And his interest in us?" Yujin asked, her voice sharp, devoid of its usual theatrical sorrow. A heavy silence. "He's recently expressed a desire for stability, a wife from a good, if currently distressed family. It would be a merger, corporate and personal." I remember the tray in my hands rattling, the cups chiming like funeral bells. A personal merger. She wouldn't. Yujin found me later, her expression a masterpiece of calculated sympathy. "Jaya," she began, taking my hands in hers. They were cold. "You loved your father more than anything. You would do anything to protect what he built, wouldn't you? This isn't just a marriage, it's a rescue mission. Chairman Park is a serious man, but he's not a monster. He needs a graceful hostess, a beautiful wife to complete his image. It's a role, a very, very comfortable role." She made it sound like a performance, a sacrifice on a stage of velvet and gold. My freedom, my future, my heart, all just currency to save a crumbling empire. What kind of daughter would I be if I said? The wedding was a media spectacle. I felt like a prized show horse, draped in silk and diamonds that felt like chains. And then I saw him, Park Min-ho. He wasn't the grizzled old tycoon I had dreaded. He was formidable, tall, with a presence that commanded the vast room. His black hair was streaked with distinguished silver, and his features were sharp, intelligent, and utterly unreadable. But his eyes, they were a deep, dark brown, and they held no warmth, no bridal joy. They assessed me, calculated my worth, and found me sufficient. That was the most terrifying part. I recited my vows with a voice that was little more than a whisper. His voice, in return, was a low, steady rumble, each word deliberate and firm. When he slid the heavy diamond band onto my finger, his touch was brief, professional. It was done. I was now Mrs. Park, a title that felt like a brand. His home was an architectural marvel, a fortress of glass and steel perched on a private hillside. It was stunning and utterly soulless. The floors were polished to a mirror shine, the art was abstract and cold. The only staff seemed to be a severe, efficient housekeeper named Mrs. Kwon, who showed me to my suite. My suite, not ours. It was a palace within a palace, with a wardrobe full of clothes with the tags still on and a view that overlooked the entire city. It was the most beautiful cage imaginable. That first night, I sat by the window, still in my silk rehearsal dinner dress, waiting for the other shoe to drop. For him to come, to lay out the rules of my new life, to claim what was his. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. But the night deepened, the city lights twinkled below, and he never came. The silence was my only companion. The next morning, I found him in the minimalist dining room, reading the financial news on a tablet. He looked up as I entered, his expression unchanging. "Did you sleep adequately?" he asked. His tone was neutral, like a doctor inquiring about a symptom. I managed a stiff nod, my throat too tight for words. "Good," he stated, and returned his attention to the tablet. The days bled into one another. We were two planets orbiting the same sun, never touching. He left before dawn, returned long after dark. We ate meals in a silence broken only by the clink of cutlery. I was drowning in a sea of luxury, dying of emotional thirst. Then, a week after the wedding, the first crack appeared in the facade. I had always found solace in poetry, in the raw emotion my new life so clearly lacked. One afternoon, wandering the cavernous library, I found a volume of Kim Sowell's work. It was a common print, but it made my heart ache for my old, messy room filled with my own books. I mentioned to Mrs. Kwon, just in passing, how my father and I had once searched for a first edition for my birthday, but it had been too rare, too expensive. It was just a memory, shared with the empty. The next evening, when I returned to my suite, a small, wrapped package sat on my bedside table. There was no card. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a pristine, leather-bound first edition of Kim Sowell's The Azaleas. My breath caught in my throat. It was impossible. How? Why? I looked up, and my eyes met Park Min-ho's from the doorway. He was just standing there, watching me. "Did you?" I whispered, holding up the book. He gave a single, short nod. "A house should contain things that bring its mistress comfort," he said, his voice still that low, unreadable baritone. And then, before I could form a thought, he was gone. The gilded walls of my cage, had they just shimmered? Or was I just starting to lose my mind? A gift, not a demand, not a rule. A gift that showed he had been listening, that he knew something about me. It was the first crack in the icy surface of my new world. And as I would soon learn, once a crack appears, the whole truth is never far behind. My stepmother had told me I was marrying a fortress, but she never warned me that the most dangerous fortresses are the ones with beautiful, hidden gardens inside. That single, thoughtful gift was a crack in the fortress walls. Park Min-ho had been listening. He knew me. But why? To lower my guard? Or was there something more behind those impassive eyes? The silence in our home persisted, but now I noticed the small things. The Guatemalan coffee I preferred had replaced his bitter brew. A subtle but telling change. The spoiling began in earnest. A stone bench appeared under the willow tree after I'd wished for one. The emerald runway dress I'd circled in a magazine was delivered to my suite. This wasn't just kindness. It was observation on a startlingly deep level. I confronted him in his study, holding the dress. "Is this your way of paying me, keeping me compliant?" He looked up, and for a fleeting moment, I saw not anger but a flicker of sadness. "This is not a transaction, Jaya. A wife should have things that please her. It is that simple." "But I'm not your wife. We're strangers. I was sold to you." He stood a solitary figure. "Because," he said, his voice dropping, "the circumstances of our beginning do not have to dictate its end." Then an invitation. "I have a trip to Tokyo. Accompany me." Tokyo was a different world. He was still reserved, but his attention was absolute. He'd observed everything. At the Ghibli Museum, a place I'd only mentioned in passing, I felt a joy I'd forgotten. I caught him watching me, and for one breathtaking second, the granite of his expression softened. It was the sun peeking through storm clouds. That night, overlooking the glittering city, I felt brave. "Why me? You could have had anyone." "Socialites come with agendas," he said, swirling his whiskey. "You came with honesty, a tragedy, not a strategy, and your eyes. You looked at me not with greed, but with resignation, like a soldier. I found that compelling." My breath hitched. He saw me. Returning home, the mansion felt different, warmer. We talked about books and art. I was falling for my husband, and the thought was terrifying. But the past lurked in the shadows. In his study, I found a photograph of a man I barely recognized, a young, laughing Minho with his arm around a beautiful, kind-eyed woman. Who was she? What happened to that laughter? He entered and froze. "Put that down," he commanded, his voice like ice. The fortress walls slammed shut. "That is not a part of my life I care to discuss." He left me standing there, confused and hurt. The ghost of that woman had built a new wall between us. The next day, Eugen's call shattered the fragile peace. "He's gutting the company. He married you for the shares. It's all a lie." The world tilted. "No," he promised. "He's a wolf, and that woman in the photo, Sioyon, she killed herself. They say his coldness broke her. Is that the man you trust?" The words were a poison dart. The kind woman from the photo, dead, by her own hand. Driven by the man buying me dresses and taking me to Tokyo. The gilded cage became a tomb. The crack in the wall sealed shut, replaced by a chilling dread. Betrayal is a cold acid. I felt like a fool. Driven by desperation, I did the unthinkable. I snooped. In his study, I found the damning evidence. Kang & Co. reports on Hanel, asset divestment, workforce optimization. It was all true. I stormed into his study, throwing the papers on his desk. "You liar, you're destroying my father's company. Was any of it real, or was it all just corporate strategy?" Tears streamed down my face. "And Sioyon, did you drive her to suicide too? Am I just the next wife you'll destroy?" The moment I said it, I knew I'd gone too far. The air left the room. His face went pale, shattered. I expected fury. Instead, he deflated. The powerful chairman vanished, replaced by a man carrying an immense weight. He went to his safe, pulled out a thick file, and placed it between us. "Sit down, Jaya. It's time you knew the truth." He opened the file. Hanel wasn't failing, it was being bled dry, embezzlement. He slid a paper toward me. The transaction trail ended with Choi Yoo-jin. I stared, my mind reeling. No, she was trying to save it. "She was covering her tracks," he said softly. "She came to me to save herself from prison. She offered me you, thinking I was the monster rumors claimed." He looked at me, his gaze unwavering. "But I knew. I married you to get you out of that house, to protect you." Tears welled in my eyes. "The restructuring is to save the viable core after I remove the cancer that is your stepmother. I am not destroying your father's legacy, Jaya. I am avenging it." I could barely breathe. "And Sioyon." His face contorted with grief. He showed me a photo of her in a hospital bed, frail but smiling. "She didn't take her own life. She had a degenerative illness. It stole her from me piece by piece. I loved her until her last breath." The truth was a tidal wave, washing away all the lies. He wasn't a monster. He was a savior. A man who had loved so deeply, the loss had scarred him forever. "I'm so sorry," I choked out. "I'm so sorry, Minho." He didn't speak. He just looked at me, his guard down, his own eyes glistening. The fortress had not just been breached. He had handed me the key. In 1 hour, my world inverted. The villain was my stepmother. The victim was my husband. The gilded cage was gone, replaced by a partnership. But Yoo-jin was still out there, desperate and dangerous. She had no idea her web of lies had collapsed. The game was far from over. And this time, I was no longer a pawn. I was a queen, ready to fight for the king who had been protecting me all along. The truth was a weapon, and for the first time, I knew how to wield it. The frightened girl who married a stranger was gone. In her place was a woman betrayed, a woman with a cause. Yoo-jin had stolen from my father, manipulated me, and slandered the man who had done nothing but protect me. It was time for the pawn to become the queen. I looked at Minho, really looked at him. The pain in his eyes was no longer a mystery, it was a shared burden. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice steady. A ghost of a smile, the first genuine one I'd ever seen from him, touched his lips. "We," he said, the word heavy with meaning, "set a trap." The next week was a whirlwind of strategy. We became partners in every sense of the word. I moved my things into his room, not because he asked, but because I wanted to. The separate suites were a relic of a marriage that no longer existed. Ours was real. I provided the insight. Yujin's vanity, her need for control, the specific offshore accounts she bragged about to her friends. Minho provided the power, a network of lawyers, forensic accountants, and private investigators. We crafted a plan. We would present her with an offer she couldn't refuse, one that would expose her completely. The stage was set at the annual Hanel Electronics shareholders meeting. The boardroom was thick with tension. Yujin swept in, dressed for a victory she hadn't yet won. She saw me standing beside Minho, and her smile was condescending. "Jaya, sweetheart," she cooed, for all the shareholders to hear. "I'm glad you're here. Perhaps you can talk some sense into your husband. He seems intent on destroying your father's life's work." All eyes turned to me. This was the moment. I stepped forward, my voice clear and strong, carrying across the silent room. "My father's life work was built on integrity, something you wouldn't understand." I turned to the stunned board. "Chairman Park has the evidence, which will now be distributed, that proves Choi Yujin has been systematically embezzling from this company for years. She drove Hanel to the brink of collapse to fund her lavish lifestyle, then sold me in marriage to cover her crimes." As the documents were handed out, I played my trump card. A recorded call, obtained by Minho's investigators, of Yujin laughing with her personal lawyer about how she fooled the naive little heiress and dumped her on the lonely old chairman. The room erupted. Yujin's face went from smug to ashen. "You ungrateful little brat, I raised you. I saved this family." "You tried to sell it," Minho's voice boomed, silencing her. "And you failed." He nodded to security. As they escorted a shrieking Yujin from the room, the weight of a lifetime of manipulation lifted from my shoulders. It was over. The authorities took Yujin away, and we began the true work of healing. Hanel Electronics, purged of its sickness, merged with Park Global not as a subjugation, but as a partnership. I took a seat on the board, my business degree finally put to use for the company my father loved. And Minho, the fortress walls didn't just come down, they were replaced by a garden. He learned to smile, a real, unreserved smile that reached his eyes. He learned to talk about Seoyeon, not with crushing grief, but with a fond, grateful love for the time they had. She was a part of his story, and I was honored to hold that part of him. One evening, in our garden, under the willow tree with our bench, he didn't get down on one knee. He simply took my hand, his thumb stroking the original wedding band. "This began with a contract," he said, his voice soft. "But I want it to continue with a vow, my vow to you, to love you, to cherish you, to spoil you silly for the rest of my life." He placed a new, delicate band next to the old one. "Will you marry me, again, for real this time?" My answer was a kiss that held a lifetime of promises. I finally understood the twisted path that had led me here. The sacrifice wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning. I had entered a gilded cage to save a company, but I found a partner, a protector, and a love so profound it saved me instead. The world saw a cold CEO and a young bride, but we knew the truth. We were two wounded souls who had built a fortress of love, strong enough to keep the world out and warm enough to call home.